an original MCM production.
I'm now very pleased to call on our winner of the Packer tickets, past President John Bernardin, who is the retired Director of Corporate Affairs at Rockwell Automation. John is going to introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Nancy. It is my honor and privilege, having worked at Rockwell for a decade, to introduce the new president and CEO of Rockwell Automation as of July 1st, Blake Moret. As CEO, Blake leads the world's largest company focused on industrial automation and information, and is going to talk to you a little about their vision to kind of help the world to be more productive and sustainable. He's passionate about the company's vision called the Connected Enterprise, which is leading automation with their in-depth knowledge of their customers' needs. Their lead director, Blake, Don Parfait, said that Blake is proven to be an exceptional leader with demonstrated readiness to lead the company. We welcome him into this new role at the conclusion of a deliberate and planned succession process, and we're delighted that he's going to propel forward our vision of the Connected Enterprise. Blake spent his entire 31 years at Rockwell Automation. And let me just kind of give you an aside. Some of you may remember that back in 2012, the International Torch Award was won by Rockwell Automation. That's given out by the Council of Worldwide Better Business Bureaus to recognize superior commitment to exceptional ethical standards that benefit customers, employees, suppliers, and shareholders. So this is the kind of environment that Blake grew up with in his career. In giving that award to Rockwell, they said the company embraces honesty, fairness, quality, responsiveness, as well as the guiding principles of integrity as an underlying value in every business transaction. So, with that kind of environment, we look forward to a great period of leadership with Blake. He's had a long career starting as a sales trainee, spent time in Europe, in Switzerland, in Canada. He's a graduate of Georgia Tech, where he learned mechanical engineering, and he's the past chair of Manufacturing Institute, which Blake just told me he's now on the executive directorship of the National Association of Manufacturers. Here at home, as you heard, he's involved with United Way on the board of directors. He understands our project in the Urban Ecology Center as a board member for the Urban Ecology Center, and is still an advisor for Georgia Tech. So with that, I look forward to a great presentation by Blake as he tells us a little bit more about the challenges of getting great people in this age of the Internet of Things. And as Eric knows, you can buy a $60,000 robot, but you have to have someone who can weld with that left half of their brain and program it with their nerdy right half of the brain. So it takes special people to work in this environment, and Blake's going to tell us a little bit more about the factory of the future and the people that it's going to take to transform them. So Blake?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm about 100 days into the new job, and the lights are still on in the clock tower, so that's a good start. But I am also specifically honored to have the opportunity to speak to you today here. In preparation for this discussion, my friend and neighbor Bill Durkin gave me a 100-year history of the Rotary Club in Milwaukee. And I noted as I looked at the history, the number of times that there's been involvement from first the Allen Bradley Company and then Rockwell International and now Rockwell Automation. Specifically, when I joined the company in 1985, I saw that the CEO of the company at the time talked about computer integrated manufacturing. And in some ways, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today, 31 years down the road, but I'm going to focus really on the human aspect of it, because despite all the technology and the progress that we've made over that period of time, it still comes down to people. It comes down to people for the innovation that creates that new technology, as well as the expertise in the specific applications. And bringing those two together is a central theme of what I hope to bring to the company and, in fact, to manufacturing. So we start with kind of a baseline of what are the factors influencing the global economy. It's the rise of the middle class, particularly in emerging markets, and their desire to increase their standard of living, wanting to have more variety in foods, being able to have pharmaceuticals that help them live longer, more automobiles, and we're seeing a greater influx of people into that middle class and desiring those goods than we've ever seen in the history of the world, really. And so we look at that as a trend that we expect to continue for really our lifetimes, as more people around the world desire to have a higher standard of living, and the connectivity of different people around the world tells them what they can have and what they can, the height to which they can aspire. And so their goals are lofty. Technical change has certainly continued at a rapid pace. A lot of the discussion today is around the interconnectivity and how being able to move data around from even basic devices is much more possible and affordable than ever before. An aging world, and specifically around the skills gap. And again, looking through the history of the Rotary Club in Milwaukee, I noticed that in 1979, the president of IBM said by 1990, 20% of the workforce is going to need to have a certain amount of computer literacy. And I don't know if we hit that in 1990, but I'll tell you today that regardless of what line of work people are going into, then that greater understanding or even lack of fear for those types of skills around computers and communication and data management is going to become a requirement to fully understand the world that they're growing up in. And that is certainly a theme in manufacturing, where it's increasingly difficult to tell apart the line workers with the managers, because so many of the tools that they're using are based on microprocessors and computers that are connected to one another. And then finally, globalization. And the point there is that we are in a globally competitive economy. And the people that our companies are competing against are playing for keeps. And so the ability to look at training a workforce as a competitive advantage and not as just a necessary cost, but to keep it as an investment year after year through good times and bad is absolutely essential to our future success. When it comes to the tech changes that are proceeding on a parallel path, it's really about interconnectivity, the ability to have scalable computing, being able to put microprocessors and to be able to connect even tiny little devices and still make that affordable. We hear about thermostats where you can check on the temperature in your house when you're traveling, all the way up to the connectivity with massive machines and the ability to predict when they need to be maintained and to be able to pull information out of those machines to help managers who might be sitting thousands of miles away make better decisions about scheduling their productivity. And so the technology has made some of these things that years ago we could talk about, that my predecessor in 1985 could talk about in terms of computer integrated manufacturing. It's much more realizable today than it ever was. Countries around the world recognizing that there's a need to be able to field a competitive team have created their own initiatives to try to help their home teams be as competitive as possible. So it's not just the manufacturing companies and the automation suppliers that are in this. We see Industry 4.0 as a sponsored activity from the country of Germany. We see Make in India. I was in China a month ago, and China Manufacturing 2025 is an imperative as those companies are trying to climb the productivity curve quicker than it took Western companies to do. So this is a global competition. Within Rockwell Automation, and as John said, we are the largest company dedicated to industrial productivity. Our vision for making this a reality is something we call the connected enterprise, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is an opportunity for companies, for manufacturers, to be able to achieve a level of productivity with that interconnectivity that they never would have had in the past. But it's not just about the technology, it's about the people as well. At the end of the day, what companies are looking for to be more productive can be boiled down into some pretty simple things. It's about faster time to market. If you're a consumer products company, being able to get a new packaging style to capture more shelf space at the grocery store can be the key to gaining rapid amounts of share. It's about lower total cost over the life cycle of that investment. It's increased uptime, and it's enterprise risk management, which has a lot to do with regulatory compliance. So at the end of the day, manufacturers seeking to be more competitive are looking for investments that can deliver real outcomes in these areas. And the people aspect of this is across a broad front. First of all, you have to have people who are conversant in the technology. But second, you need to have kind of a lean mindset and the spirit of continuous improvement. Because one of the important aspects of this is that equipment that's shipped today is going to have to be made even more productive over the life cycle of that investment. And similarly with people, the education that one gets today coming out of college as a 22 or 23-year-old, no matter how good it is, the concept of lifelong learning is absolutely essential. Because 10 years later, the amount of new technology and the other demands of a job that a person might get into are going to require that they continue to have the opportunities to acquire additional skills and to refresh old ones throughout the entire life cycle of their investment, of their career. And so, and I know that there's a number of university representation here at lunch, which is great to see, but providing more on and off ramps to that educational system. And that's something that's shared by manufacturers, by learning centers, and to some extent by the government as well, to be able to provide that education, a great early education that, by the way, begins with education well before somebody goes to a tech school or college, and all the way through until the time that they retire. That's an opportunity probably greater than any other for competitive advantage. The skills are becoming more converged between what somebody looked for in the past on the plant floor and what's needed in the carpeted space of the plant, in the IT world. And I mentioned before, it's harder to tell the line workers apart from the managers today. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the technology converge, we're seeing the commercial practices converge, and we're seeing the skills that are required converge as well. And so within that educational system, multidiscipline education is really important. And the big challenge in industry today is to be able to take the people who have that IT understanding, the understanding of cloud operating systems and Ethernet connectivity, and to be able to marry that with the application knowledge right on the plant floor. The companies that can bring those two things together win. And that's where the battleground is today in manufacturing, is to be able to bring those things together and then to be able to deliver the outcomes that make manufacturers more productive. It's scalable. It's not a one-time thing. This doesn't happen all at once. People can put the foundation in place with individual machines and then to work up over time to connect plants and eventually across an entire enterprise. That's one of the things that we think is important to recognize, that all the technology and all the skills that are going to make this as effective as possible don't happen overnight. And very few manufacturers can say, I want a connected enterprise, or I want an Industry 4.0. It happens gradually over a period of time to be able to make that investment where it's needed and where it's appropriate. I'll give a couple of examples of where this has happened and where we've helped American industry be more productive. Ford Motor Company is an example where they're using software on top of their basic manufacturing processes to automate the vehicle scheduling. And that delivered a lot of results to them. They've got 25 of 40 plants in their system around the world that are using this kind of technology. But one of the things that Ford did that was really insightful was they undertook a comprehensive training program for the people who were going to be receiving this newer technology. That wasn't a one-size-fits-all training. It was understanding the specific starting point for their workers and where they needed to get to, and tailoring the training to those individual needs. And again, they looked at that, and it's absolutely essential that that training and that education of workers be seen as a competitive advantage, not as just a necessary cost to be squeezed to its bare minimum. And I see that in my business over and over, is that every bit of that training is paid back in full. And by the way, when it's done in a cohort, when it's done as part of a group, it increases retention. Because especially younger workers today, they're looking for their workplace as a part of their social life as well. And so one of the programs that I'm proudest about is an engineer and training program where we put over 100 young engineers a year through a program. It typically lasts about 4 months for each session, and they're in a group with another 35 or 40 of their peers from around the world. It reflects the diversity that they expect in university. It gives them the education so that they actually know how our equipment is applied. And maybe most important, it creates friends that increases our retention of these younger employees. Now we have to set our expectations a little bit different than when I started into the workforce, where it was very reasonable to expect that somebody joining a particular company would stay with that company through the entire span of a 40 or 45-year career. And that's, we probably can't hope for that in the majority of the young people coming out today. But I can keep them a lot longer than my competitor if I create this kind of environment that's fun for them. And it comes down to something as simple as that. They're learning things. Eventually they have to contribute to the growth and profit of the company. But if they have a lot of fun along the time and they're doing it with friends, that's just fine. That's okay. And so we're going to continue to do more of that. We also have something to offer employees, and again, it especially resonates with our younger employees, about sustainability. Even though the products that we provide are kind of techy and sometimes a little bit hard to understand, we provide energy savings to a lot of manufacturers through our basic control processes. This is an example at a food company where we help them recover some of the heat and energy that they were using in their basic process, making them more efficient, more productive. But when we can talk about that kind of thing to our employees, and for them to understand that it's not exclusively about photovoltaic cells and wind turbines and other alternative energy, we have a story there as well. But it's just in basic everyday processes that we can help reduce the energy footprint of these companies. So automation isn't just about spewing pollutants into the sky. It's also about cleaning things up and using less. When I talk about our approach to the connected enterprise, I talk about the human aspect of it a lot, because it's not just about the technology. Even as a company that, you know, increasingly is becoming more like a tech company, it starts with people's understanding of our customers' best opportunity for productivity. It combines the technology, innovation, with that expertise, as I talked about before, so that it's intelligently applied. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it's about simplification. It's about making the technology simpler, being able to provide a lower risk implementation for these projects. And in the manufacturing world, that may be my biggest challenge over the course of the remaining course of my career, is to simplify what we do, make it easier, and reduce the risk. Because if it's still complex, then it's possible for companies to actually see less productivity than before they went to the newer technology. And that's all about people. That's all about people recognizing what the actual problem is that they're trying to address, and being able to make that technology easier to use. If anybody happens to be going to Atlanta the second week in November, we have a giant show where we bring this technology to life. Again, if you have an interest in automation, I know some of the university representatives here today are actually going to be there, which is great. I'm going to be there. I may take one more attempt to explain to my parents who still live in Atlanta just what I do, and I'll have some props with me. So. And to accelerate our progress, we've also made some acquisitions here recently. ACP is, by pure coincidence, an Atlanta-based software provider, and then Maverick Technologies, based in St. Louis. We bring in about 400 people who have domain expertise, particularly in chemicals, oil and gas industries. We're demonstrating what we say, and that is we got to marry the two. We got to bring the technology together with the expertise, and we intend to compete and win against some very large global competitors in this space. We win every day today, and we're going to win more in the future. So I'll finish with one comment, and again, I think it has special relevance to the group here today. Being a strong community partner is something that is important, has always been important for the Allen Bradley Company and for Rockwell, but also to me personally. I'm active in the UEC, the United Way. I was thrilled and pleasantly surprised to see a lot of friends from those walks of life here today, and the community and the opportunity to do our part to improve that education starting at early ages is something that is going to continue to be a cause that I do what I can to help there. Manufacturing Day, explaining to kids just what manufacturing is about. We had a bunch of kids in our Mequon facility on Friday. Probably had some of their parents just to, explain again what is it that manufacturers do today. I know the single most effective way that I taught or helped my kids understand what I did was taking them to a Coca-Cola bottling plant outside of Atlanta when they were both really small, and being able to point to the boxes and say, yeah, that's my stuff. That's what we sell. And it was reinforced with the free samples at the end of the line, so it was an overall pleasant experience for them. And so we're trying to do that on a broader scale. So with that, I am over a little bit, but I'm happy to answer a few questions. Yes.
Blake, once upon a time, Allen Bradley, now Rockwell, in its present location, was in a heavily industrial area. And that's all been replaced by shopping centers, condos, apartments, fine dining restaurants, and lots of nightlife entertainment.
Yeah.
Is that a positive thing for attracting and retaining the brightest and best?
I think it absolutely is. I think as we look at the physical location that people work in, that has a big influence not only on the attraction of talent, but also on their efficiency and their effectiveness and their engagement through their working career. And so I love it to see the additional construction and the vibrancy continue to build in that area. I find when we live in Whitefish Bay, and my wife says, well, we're going to go out, and I point out the restaurants, within about a 2-mile radius of Rockwell, and she said, let's go a little further away than where you work. But it's very possible, in terms of, nightlife for my kids, as they're looking at where they're going to live after they get out of school. I've got a daughter at UWM and a daughter in Madison, and the opportunity for them to look at Milwaukee, as a place that they stay. I'm thrilled to see that. Internal, to the spaces as well. We've done some things where we've renovated some locations within our building that, quite frankly, look like they were parts of the set from Mad Men, in the 50s and 60s, and we've changed those to open formats that are more attractive, to workers my kids' age, and quite frankly, I like it a lot as well, and my peers like it also, because we desire different styles of work, and that's an investment that we're going to continue to make in Milwaukee and at our other plants. So I'm very happy to see the continued development. Other questions? Yes? And just to repeat the question, it refers back to an earlier slide that I showed that said 20% of the companies that connect their operations outcompete. And the question was, that seems a little bit low. I think that refers to the companies that we have hard evidence of, and that they've actually been able to track that before and after they did their connectivity and their automation, they saw an inflection in terms of their competitiveness. I will tell you, just as a follow-on point to that, it is hard sometimes to measure accurately the results, the before and after we've gotten past the first great wave of automation where you were replacing hardwired devices and, fundamental levels of electricity that weren't truly microprocessor based, it's sometimes hard to measure the benefits. But reducing unplanned downtime is the single biggest way to be able to justify these additional investments. If you can look at what your downtime was in the prior year and see a reduction previously, everybody knows what their downtime costs, and that drives a return on investment faster than anything else today. That's the killer app that we look at, that Microsoft looks at, all of our competitors. So, yes, John.
So when Mike Lovell came and spoke to us, actually, when he first became chancellor, he talked about Milwaukee as having one of the highest concentrations of engineers per capita, 150,000 engineers. As you look at kind of lifelong learning, specifically for engineers with so many of them in Milwaukee, what things could this community do to help with lifelong learning of engineering professionals from STEM all the way through, senior tech?
It's a target-rich environment. I think it begins with the involvement of those engineers in primary education, kids who are going through school as part of the STEM program. So getting engineers in the game when it comes to things like Project Lead the Way, the first robotics leagues, moving up through obviously the internships and making sure that those are programs that are just as vibrant as possible. And then going forward, things like consortia between manufacturers and suppliers like us, as well as universities, to be able to bring together the best and brightest to be able to test new technologies, to invest in new technologies, but to do it under the guidance of subject matter experts, people who have been there, who have lived on the plant floor, and to be able to take new technology that is, represents a flash of brilliance on the part of some, new student, for instance, and then to be able to refine it with the wisdom of somebody who's worked in industry for a long time. It's something that we're investigating today, and I think it's very promising going forward. Yes, question in the back. It's a great question. And so the question was that in the construction industry, for instance, the industry as a whole seems to be doing a good job on preparing workers for bankable skills that they can make a career with as they come out of school. And in manufacturing, what are we doing to prepare students, in some cases just coming out of high school, with the skills that they need to be competitive with going forward? And how much education do they have to get after that? For instance, do they have to, expect to get a master's degree to be able to get a reasonable job in manufacturing? I'm going to switch hats for just a minute to answer that question and go to my work with the Manufacturing Institute, which is part of the National Association of Manufacturers, and actually Eric serves with me on that board, Eric Eisbester. And it's something that, in terms of workforce development, in that organization, we spend a lot of time looking at certified skills that come from high school or tech schools are an important way to set a benchmark in that respect. So there's a lot of places to get that sort of education, and it doesn't require a 4-year degree in many cases. What it does require almost universally is basic work skills. So if you think of work keys and the ability to show up on time and to have certain basic professional behaviors at work, that's kind of a starting point. But then looking at whether it's welding, that Eric could talk a whole lot more about than I could, or other manufacturing skills, it typically does require some familiarity with microprocessor-based equipment. And again, regardless of the level of job you're doing, automation has reached far enough into manufacturing where it's hard to expect to be able to keep and sustain a career and grow a career without some basic education there. We're advocating for, again, more on and off ramps, and so being able to get a 2-year tech degree and have that when it fits into somebody's lifestyle, to be able to articulate that into a 4-year degree as they move through their career, I think is an important part of that. The other piece is the outreach from manufacturers to counselors and parents of high school students to be able to explain to them the kinds of jobs that you can do in manufacturing, because there's just not a lot of knowledge of that. And in one case, we have a general manager who's offered internships to high school counselors for their summer working at our facility in Mequon. And I think that's not at scale yet, but I think it's a brilliant idea just to explain what it is that we do in a manufacturing environment and to be able to expose people to this huge diversity of types of jobs. And that's a starting point. Being able to automate that and create online tools is something that we're looking at, but I wouldn't say it's at scale yet. Other questions? Well, thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes today.
An MCM production.